Thank you all for coming and for joining us in this basement. We hope that you enjoy tonight's program and that you will also linger on after it concludes, as we will ascend from here and move the discussion to the Strecha restaurant, where eating and perhaps even digestion will ensue.
We are happy to be joined tonight by Avital Ronell, American philosopher, critical theorist, feminist, queer and political thinker, professor at the New York University and the European Graduate School.
Now, Avital is somewhat of a superstar in her field and definitely needs no further introduction. That is why we won't be introducing her tonight any further, and we'll talk about something entirely different instead.
In Disney Pixar's 2004 movie, The Incredibles, in the film's closing moments, a mole-like figure bursts onto the scene. The figure erupts from under the city with an enormous drilling device and declares war on peace and happiness, announcing, quote,
"Behold the underminer. I am always beneath you, but nothing is beneath me."
End quote. It is no coincidence that we reserve these underground spaces for this occasion. Nothing is beneath us tonight.
So this is not an evening of supers or hypers, but one of subs and hypos. In other words,
the underground, the subterranean, is often and traditionally conceived as the seat of subversion. From the image of moles digging their way below the surface to undermine the manifest structure, to Dostoevsky's underground man, obsessively devising his private revolutions in the confined comfort of his rancid basement. Linguistically and conceptually, subversion and the subterranean go hand in hand. The intellectual underground seems to be at home in the cellar. The genius loci is an imp favorably inclined towards disruption and sabotage.
This place, then, welcomes thought that does precisely that.
Subverts.
Displaces soil.
Unearths what its predecessors dared not disturb.
We hope that Avital, as a practitioner of such thought, also finds herself at home here, ready to tunnel, excavate, or put more mildly, challenge the compacted soil of settled intellectual frameworks.
And yet, epitaphs such as an illustrious speaker or an academic superstar point to the light, to the sky, the apparent antithesis on the underground. And so, we must ask whether as eminent a speaker as Avital can still lay claim to the sphere of subversive subterranean. Does intellectual stardom, academic infamy, if you will, not elevate one to such intellectual or celestial heights that the subversive potential or drive dissipates into the air en route?
No. And perhaps indeed the converse is true. The above, the superstardom, is a position from which digging, destruction, upbow is very, if not the most, effective. Today's topic is an example of this. The question of authority, of paternality, of the master-slave dialectic is an age-old one. And yet tonight, in this Hegelian Hades, it will be approached from a place of subversion.
We hope.
We don't know yet.
The question posed tonight, who's your daddy, is both rhetorical and profoundly unacademic. It also matters who is interrogated by it. Is it, for example, inevitably Kafka, whose answer reveals to us that his daddy is the prototypical image of paternal imperiousness, whose injunctions and, in general, modes of upbringing, or rather, as Avital would say, downbringing, fashion the son into a taciturn, self-conscious stick figure? Or is it, more likely, Sylvia Plath, whose poem arguably still paints a picture of a daddy uncannily similar to that of Kafka's, a daddy with a stifling hold on the speaker's life, a daddy who even from beyond the grave requires submission. Perhaps it is appropriate to ask then, who submits to whom in this subterranean space? Kafka to his father, Plath to her daddy, or her daddy to Plath?
And maybe it is the two of us who however daringly have taken it upon ourselves to introduce Avital, still crucially submit to her as to a figure of subversive authority. It is perhaps most fitting that we too get to be on the front lines of submission tonight, because we scraped. Well, just hold on. Because we scraped at the bottom of the barrel and found no better bottoms to bear such responsibility than the two of us. Indeed, these two queens of the night, you might say, can say that we are honored and humbled to submit ourselves and all of you to the forthcoming.
As proof of our submission, we proffer silence. The fact that we will finally shut up and leave the posing and the answering of all the questions to our Avital. Please, the floor, the subfloor is yours.
Thank you so much, Gatas. Thank you so much, Oliver and Peter. I'm very touched and moved to be here among you. Hello, Prague. What's wrong with the sound? Is it
very booming, isn't it?
Yeah, isn't it? Or
try this.
Thank you. Thank you for rising to the occasion. This sounds less disruptive, right?
Into it.
Oh, I love this part. Is this close enough?
I think it's better.
Okay. Can you deal with this, or is it, yeah? Let me know if there's something terribly annoying, like an upstairs neighbor making noise, which used to upset Kafka very much, and all of us. So thank you so much for the splendid welcoming and your the contract you draw as outstanding masochists who are enrolling a teacher in the ritualistic submission that we will now enter together. You can treat me like a television, hit the pause button, ask questions, disrupt, and so on. It's not necessarily in your interest to do so, but I'm going to allow it. And I want to thank all my friends here, remembering that for Nietzsche, friendship is the future. So I chose, among other possibilities for tonight, also because it's Pride, so happy Pride. It's not Pride here yet, but in New York it is. Next week, right, or something. It's the cycle. So in these times of trauma and hauntedness, we're bearing the brunt of patriarchal overload. And I thought it would be something that we would want to consider together in the most, let's say, unremarkable, even in terms of unremarkable philosophical trajectories from Plato through Zizek and others. The paternal position is something that still needs to be contended with, says Freud. Freud says it a little differently than others. He places an accent on it that we might want to attune our little rabbit ears to. I say little rabbit ears because that's the figure for Heidegger of thinking. And if we had time, we would think to co-think, why does Heidegger choose, of all the possible exalted figurations and emblematic possibilities, why does he choose little rabbit ears? I would say, just to launch this consideration, it's because the rabbit is nervous, it's hyper alert, it's waiting to be preyed upon, and that anxiety or zalga in being in time is something that leads the very possibility of thought that he was such a redneck, disturbed and disappointing, let's say, civic identity is another column. Nonetheless, he sometimes nailed it and got it right. So the exemplary pose of thinking is to be there with your nervous, so nerves, and we could consider Benjamin here and Krauss, all neighbors of Prague, with their advocacy of the rights of nerves. So they said the way you could think philosophically and subversively and underground and also above board, more or less, is according to the rights of nerves. For example, if something makes you shake and quake, or you're very pissed off, or you're led by your nerves, you're deeply upset, that's the way to go about things heuristically, meaning attack things that, or lean into the things that really disrupt your very being to the core of your immune system. The great poet Paul Celan, in a different but not unrelated way, said that we should stay with the upset, wenn das überhaupt möglich ist. If you can, stay with your upset. Don't repress, don't disavow, don't crush it out, don't bleed out on some lonely sidewalk to get rid of the upset, but stay with it, inscribe it, allow yourselves to be inscribed by it. So Freud, of all people, this is how unfair one has been to him in certain ways, and then remind me to switch to the Lacan channel. Freud says that we still have to contend with the mystery, but he doesn't say the mystery. We still have to contend with the victory of patriarchy. So Freud, father of psychoanalysis, says, WTF. What the fuck? How is it possible that patriarchy has come to crush our little balls, whether we have them or not, according to different levels of phantasms? So so Lacan, jumping off of Freud's springboard, actually refers us to the paternal metaphor. So it's not a matter of grounding the paternal in anatomical scientificity or who has the biggest dick. We all know women do, but and that needs to be defined as well. But there's a kind of level of relation to language and the way that language is deployed and through which we surrender ourselves to being that determines what holds sway over us. Here, if we had time, and I'm not going to eat up your time with too much of a rapid fire series of references and indications and directions, but still, this is one of the questions raised by Kant and picked up by Jean-Luc Nancy in his characteristic, revolutionary, perverse, serious way, which is in terms of something like the categorical imperative, what is it that holds sway over us? What calls us to order? What makes us fearful and obedient? Which in Heidegger is linked to being able to hear and attune yourself. Gehorsamkeit and Hören, so obedience and heeding are intimately related. Can you surrender yourselves and submit yourselves with the greatest rigor to that which calls you to being. And that very often is something that is, that takes a lot out of you. That I'll just leave as a sidebar to suggest that we still need to contend, says Freud, with the victory of patriarchy. It's a mystery, an enigma. But Lacan, who doesn't consider, and neither does Plato already, but we'll get to the metaphysics of paternity and who gets to slap paternity suits on whom. I'm taking another sidebar. Lou Salome, according to Nietzsche, impregnated him with the thought of the eternal return. She whispered the truth of his thought into his ear. She inseminated his ear. Again, if we had a lot of time and a lot of sessions, we think about a history of not only what gets inseminated into the ear and how ears in psychoanalysis, it's very important that you can't shut down your ears. That, okay, something might go unconscious, but you can't close your ears. As you know, that might sound, oh, is this why I came here tonight, to learn that I can't close my ears? But we've had a few pairs of ears already trembling and nervously trying to open up and surrender something or catch a call. So Lou Salome inseminated Nietzsche through the ear, and this is something that you already have going on in Hamlet, when there's poison put in Polonius's ear, when there are membranes and curtains and ear-like structuring that also have the power to kill, to inseminate, or to take someone down. The whole of Hamlet begins with the whisper goes. So something starts with something that's poured into your ears. And this is something that Derrida in another context addresses as the invaginated ear. Something about the ear that Nietzsche has already indicated is an invaginated space. He was very proud of his ears. Those of you who know Nietzsche as well as I do, my buddy Nietzsche. He not only wrote about the labyrinthine structure of the ears with their little minotaurs waiting for you, but he was very proud of his little beautiful ears. That's a displacement, if we had time, that we would also attribute to Ernest Jones, who wrote a great essay called The Madonna's Insemination Through the Ears, because there was a shuttle from the vaginal to the ear canals. So this is I'm threading you through all sorts of moments and snippets of intellectual history that may or may not enable you to see the frame of tonight's encounter, namely, who's your daddy? And where does the insemination, the dissemination, all sorts of seminations occur? Again, a seminar, which is what this was entitled, right? We're having an evening seminar, is also derived from, obviously, a seminar. So in our seminar tonight, which is part of the transmission of a seed, which classically excludes what gets constructed as a woman or feminine, already has a history in metaphysics, certainly in Plato, that we want to be alert to. Remind me to go back to Plato, Robin, can you? So Lacan says, and then I know there's a Kojève conference coming up in Prague soon. Kojève says, whether or not you believe in God, doesn't matter, that's trivial. And I know that Prague is proud of a certain atheist bent. Whether or not there's something that trickles down from God the Father. So this is a very strong kind of pressure point on us that I was suggesting Jean-Luc Nancy indicates, which is under whose sway are we? Whether or not we're believers, there's still something of a kind of super egoical nature and capacity that weighs you down and has you submit. And what is that? How do we offer a description or a redescription? How are we inscribed by this? So Lacan, taking off from, obviously from Freud's thought, says, look, we're all involved in patricidal excitability, like you want to kill the father, as we'll see in the poem by Sylvia Plath. We're all involved in that. The only one who really mastered it, which is the wrong word, it's ironically deployed here, is Kafka, which is how to be a good loser when faced with a militaristic, brutal bully of a father, Hermann Kafka. So Hermann Kafka and his relation to Franz Kafka required me in the, apropos of the Brief an den Vater, so the letter to father, to consider a new hermeneutics. Hermeneutics is the science of let's say, explicating texts. I'll just leave it at that. Kafka knew how to be and taught us how to be a good loser rather than a sore loser or a tyrannical loser or a killer loser. Gesundheit. So Lacan says a lot of us are still inscribed in and involved in patricidal energies, even if it means overcoming your teachers, being competitive with another person, and ideally we'd have time to shift into fratricide, or the relation of brothers, which is the origin of all war. It's Cain and Abel are the original emblem of warlike relations. It's brothers who kill one another. Some Muslims and some Jews, they're brothers. So we would want to look into that, but tonight it's devoted to who's your daddy. And Lacan says, you gotta choose or lose. This is my translation. It's le père ou pire. If you think you can dispense with father, you're gonna get worse. You're gonna get more massacred and more throttled with whatever presumes to substitute for the paternal metaphor. So that's, what you hear now is a relation to the impossible. My teacher, my mentor, my tormentor, my beloved educator, Derrida, put us in spaces of aporia, or in aporetic snags, meaning Derrida once said, or said it 1,000,000 times, if I've said it once, I've said it 100 times, that if it weren't impossible, he wouldn't be into it. He leaves the possible for the others. So this is an impossible predicament for us, to need to mow down however the paternal comes down the pike as, that need, even if it stays really blocked in the unconscious. I'm not saying everyone is carrying a piece when they go home and saying, all right, Dad, this is it. That showdown happens in displaced and condensed vignettes or imaginary encounters. But Lacan says, choose or lose, choose and lose. It's le père ou pire. So if you think you can discard with the very thing that we're kind of almost instinctually, let's say, programmed to go after or push back on, the paternal, then if you think you can perform or operate an erasure, you're going to get worse. You don't know what's coming down the pike. I'm not sure how committed I am to that, but I do want us to put all of this on our menu to see the complication of the itinerary that I proposed before we turn to Sylvia Plath's famous poem, Daddy. And why does she call it Daddy? It's a childish appellation. It's also maybe girly girl, daddy. Who's your daddy? Then gets taken up in some sectors of gay culture. And most recently, who was sucking up to Trump?
Mark Rutte.
Mark Rutte said, he's our daddy, meaning the European children are, anyway, forget it. But there is the most serious tyrannical atrocities are being conducted under the appropriations and self-understanding of who's your daddy. And there's an aggravation of the patriarchal signifiers that are supporting current fascisms and tyrannies and despotic behaviors. That's why I think the question, who's your daddy, as ironically as it's pitched by me, of course, because I'm your daddy, and you know that. But it's also a very seriously political, ballistic kind of attack on all of us. And it shouldn't be allowed to remain sidelined or unconscious. You know how Freud famously said, wo es war, soll ich werden, meaning where the id was, or whatever. I'm just doing shorthand abbreviation. Where the id is, or the unconscious, or things we don't acknowledge, you got to bring it to consciousness. Even if you think this is old stuff, I've handled it, I've dealt with it. Oh my God, I've been to therapy 5 times a week for the last 20 years. Enough about me. You know, it's still somehow what's incumbent on us as thinkers and critical warriors is to see where things are hiding in the underground, in the subversive spaces that aren't necessarily allowed to see the light of day or discursive inquiry. So it doesn't matter that it might seem archaic, but it's archaic also in us and as us. So I said, remind me to go back to Plato. For Plato, there's a fiction of paternity. For Nietzsche, there's an enabling fiction. Like sometimes we need these fictions to get going and to get our aggression well honed. Don't forget, Nietzsche is not a have a nice day kind of guy. He gets very aggressive and in an attack mode, poor baby. This guy was very, as Heidegger says, the shyest of all people, of all Daseins. He was shy, he was sick, he was always throwing up, he had migraines. Now, mind you, Deleuze has said that throwing up in Nietzsche is a reversal of dialectics. So when you mentioned Hegel, and I said at one point, we'll throw up together. That's a great Nietzschean post-philosophical motif, which is we don't have to keep it down. How do you reverse dialectics? How do you get rid of something? Don't forget that thinking and having ideas is often assimilated to the digestive tract, right? You digest ideas, you have to digest this, or you can't digest it, and so on and so forth. Nietzsche was very keen on that, and that's why I bring it up as well. So for Plato, there is the fiction of paternity that that really offers an important feature and grounding feature to metaphysics that I would go into if I could, and I'm just referring you to Plato's Pharmacy, an essay by Derrida on drugs, paternity, and other delights. I wanted to say something. Oh, and writing, and don't forget that writing, drugs, and sovereignty are connected in ways that would be important to map and establish together. We don't have that kind of time, but I do want to remind you that the king or the sovereign or the great metaphysical father doesn't write. His word should suffice. You could never imagine a God writing or going, let me note this. This is one of the scandals of Hamlet, by the way, when you know trouble is coming down the pike. When the ghost tells Hamlet, bless you, I was killed by your uncle Claudius. Hamlet, in the theatrical tradition, but also in terms of the temporality and rhythm of vengeance, is supposed to whip out his sword and say, I avenged my father. Instead, he says, he takes out his little phone and he says, let me note that, let me write that down. Daddy was killed by Uncle Claudius. The scandal of writing it down, first of all, means he is a son. He's a writer. He's Kafka. He's a son. He's the writing machine. The scandal also means, and then he puts it as a post-it on a refrigerator, which wasn't invented yet, but nonetheless, if you have to note something, first of all, it means you're going to forget it, right? And it's an excremental sign. You have to write it down. You have to be reminded. You need a technology of memory to supplement. It means that Hamlet is not absorbing the scandal of this murder. It means it's already forgotten. You know how famously Hamlet is so-called neurotic and hesitant to avenge his father. You see that already when he pulls out the notepad and says, I'm writing this down. You know, it also means he is the son. A father, the king, the sovereign, would never be caught dead or only dead, bending down or writing something. The sovereign word does not tolerate or suffer writing. So there's a lot to be said about who's writing, who's your daddy. Daddy doesn't write. And this is one of the collision points. So let me gallop along these points before we continue and can discuss what are, in Western, let's say, letters, what are the emblems of paternity? of the father? What are the stories where the father asserts himself or herself? You have, of course, our Erzvater, so the primal father is Abraham. And what a psycho that was, right? Taking up Mount Moriah, his son, for slaughter, under the sway of God the Father, who says, you have to sacrifice the biggest love in your life, what is most dear to you, and you have to do it. And very importantly, for both Kafka and Kierkegaard, what's his name? Isaac, follows silently in sheer obedience. Actually, and this is more Dostoevskian than anything else perhaps, Isaac, as you all know, was not sacrificed, but there's and this for Levinas will be very important. Why does God start substituting? The ram shows up, which one of my teachers, Hélène Cixous, has pointed out. The ram is a paternal figure, but also a figure of, according to Celan and Derrida, of great persecution. Like, why are you choosing me to substitute for your sacrifice? Why am I the sacrifice? In Celan, the ram's horns become the shofar and become very attached. The whole body of the ram becomes attached to Holocaust, to burning of a Jewish body, which we would need to analyze down to Gaza, who burns whom and so on. So Abraham is one of the sacrificial psycho-fathers. I'm saying it very quickly, and I know you're very religious and offended, so let me say I don't apologize, but I know it. I know you're not. They say you're not in the Czech Republic. It's so fabulous. I mean, this I would not get away with in Jesus land, you know. But, and then we have the other figuration of Papa and Father, God the Father, which is, so Isaac, let me go back to Dostoevsky and Isaac. Isaac was probably, if you read the Mishdrashi and other texts, he was offended and hurt and wounded not to be sacrificed. It's like, excuse me, I'm not good enough, you know? And he, according to a number of interpretations, Isaac, who was not sacrificed by the father, ended up just drilling holes in the earth. He went crazy, though crazy didn't really mean the same thing, I'm sure. But he was completely demolished by not being able to sacrifice, to be the sacrificial body. Levinas asks, will we ever sacrifice? Or are we just bound up in sacrificial behaviors? The non-sacrifice of Isaac then leaks into its double and displacement in Christ on the cross. It is said in some of the texts that Jesus of Nazareth thought he was a repeat and remake of Isaac, and that he was going to be somehow rescued in the last minute. As you know, he wasn't, and was in the resurrection. But that's very important too for us, and it's come down the pike in many different ways, and according to many literatures, which is to say, the immemorial utterance and question which is, why have you abandoned me? Abba, Abba. Father, why have you abandoned me? So the drama and trauma ongoing, maybe mutating, of the abandoning father is something that traverses all sorts of literatures and religions and politics, which is the absent father, which is something that we would want to pursue more rigorously. But the wounding of the wounded nature of the one who is abandoned by the father. And what is a father? Isn't a father that which can only abandon at some level of imaginary existence in existence? I know I'm saying this a little recklessly, but perhaps you can pick some things that appeal to you or repel you, because that's also a way to go about our business in critical work. What really seems revolting, and I'm thinking of Camus' sense of revolt, which is revolution, revolt, revulsion again, and what is disgusting or revolting to you is very important to not suppress in your thinking, perhaps. So we have these images of fathers that don't show up, that allow or demand or command the death of the son. We have other figures in Freud in Totem and Taboo, where the brothers get together and kill the father and find out they made a big mistake. Because guess what? Father has more authority and is more of a killer being in his absence. When he's sitting, drinking beer and watching TV or football, as in almost in Kafka, and he's just being a slob or a bully or something, there's something you can do about, but when they abscond, the power increases, according to Freudian thought. So these are some of the points that I wanted to make, in addition to marking the drama of the split father, which is very important, again, from Freud to Zizek and beyond, if there's a beyond, which is father. Now, please, permission to speak freely? Not sure. I'll get a permit from you. There's father, the magnanimous, the generous, the engendering, and I am quoting Lacan, or father the fucker, who is depriving you, who takes away things from you, who threatens you, who absconds with your lover, or, as Zizek said, when there were those horrible Austrian fathers in cellars like this, who have been abusing their daughters. Zizek says this is a Freudian paradigm, that there are the monster fathers. Usually it's left to imaginary split-off segments of the paternal, let's say, appropriation. That there's a horror father, and then there's the one who's a good daddy, who's kind, and whom you count on for all sorts of spermatic economies, meaning also money, honey. You do want to be aware that there's always been, so did I say that Zizek says he's not surprised when there are revelations of these horror fathers who are invaders and rapists and so on. That's already part of the Freudian dogma, if there is a dogma, but part of the, let's say, catalog of paternal aberration. So let me see if there's, oh yeah, I have things to say about founding fathers, but I'm going to, about phallogocentrism, but I also want you to speak, should you want to. I have a lot to say, but why would you be amenable, instead of listening to my ranting? I think you've seen more or less the itineraries I'm running now, that Lou Salome was the father of Nietzsche's thought on the eternal return, and Nietzsche opened her ears. Nietzsche is often trans in a very, very explicit way. The woman in Nietzsche begins as Eve. He says, now that's a sassy bitch. That's my interpretation, translation. He would say it. I feel I'm opening my ears to him, which is that he said, Eve is the gay scientist. She went against the wishes and commands of her husband and God the Father. She needed to taste evil. She was on the side of the phallic serpent. And you've seen, those of you who have Macs, right, laptops, they have a bite in the apple. They know they're evil. And Eve is the scientific, remind me to say something about Faust. The scientific engine. She mowed down her husband's wishes or demands and God's and went beyond good and evil. Because on the premises of needing to know, she needed to know. And she didn't care how much punishment she was looking at, and she was looking down the, let's say, the celestial barrel of those guns that were pointed at her. She had snipers all over the place waiting for her to have labor pains and so on. She is being punished to this day for going beyond good and evil, and in the name of knowledge. So Nietzsche said, she's me, I'm Eve, and that's the scientific spirit that I have incorporated, says Nietzsche. And then in other texts, Nietzsche will say, women are superior, let's face it. Of course, he says shit about women, so let's not get too excited. Women are superior because they never go, and this is his example, who knew? They never go for the good boys or guys. They like bad boys. And Nietzsche, he says, that's my proof. I have nothing else to say. They know they're beyond good and evil, women. So they're the real thinkers, and so on and so forth. Okay, I've made my Nietzsche pitch. And what did I say I wanted to? Faust. Do you know Faust? Goethe's Faust? Yes. You're looking at me like, yes, hello, we're not idiot. You know, the first technomaniac Streber who cut a deal with the devil. When you see the great drama of Faust start its engines, you find out in one little corner of Goethe's explications that Faust's father is something, left a debt, including, at the level of Freud's Ratman, by the way. Ratman is running around, he's an obsessional neurotic because his father left a debt that he has to clean up. So how much do you have to clean up after a mistake of the paternal lineage, in the paternal lineage? Those of you who have had Nazi fathers and other kinds of fathers have been cleaning up the mess for a long time. And so Faust's father, it turns out, in a little dark alley of this great, great, great tragedy is, was a doctor who basically committed a lot of malpractice. He was a military doctor and killed everyone he treated. So you find out, and that may be, Freud really relied heavily on Goethe. So this may be an unconscious thing that we all have to a certain degree. Some of you are blessed with just homeopathic droplets of this. Others have tsunamis of, oh my God, I have to clean up my father's shit my whole life. You know, enough about me. But, so Faust, Faust, the great, 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 let's say, sign of scientificity, going over the edge or limit of what is permissible in your relation to being and knowledge and so on. It all starts up with a paternal mistake that he has to pay for. He served the notice of debt for his father. And this is what kind of gets his engine going into one of the most famous texts that we all have to submit ourselves to. So these are some examples of what I would want to investigate with you. But if you want, we could try to just wrap this up with Sylvia and then talk, or you can talk now. I don't know how your rights of nerves are popping up. Like, do you need to say, does anyone have an avid need to say something? I know that's not very helpful or encouraging, but, you know, don't hesitate again to interrupt or do something. Do you agree to go to part 2 now? Yeah? Okay, so can you blow this up a little and give this out? Thank you. So I chose for today a poem for us to read together. And I haven't had the willpower to offer you a coherent closural statement yet. You know, Freud says we need closure. Our narcissism demands that kind of coherency. And maybe you'll see that that's what this poem asks for or demands. It ends, its last line is, Daddy. Does she say daddy twice or once?
Yes.
Twice. That's important too, the repetition, the stutter. Nietzsche, as you know, was considered to philosophize with a hammer, but he also philosophizes with a stammer, I would say. So what does a stutterance, I call it, do? Or a doubling, a repetition, it already breaks the father. As Kafka does in the letter to father, he addresses him, dearest father. And he wasn't sure, should it be dear father or dearest? Dearest is already a problem, because it means there's 1, 2, maybe 3 fathers, because there's the unicity and singularity of father should not permit of seriality or doubling. It's God the Father. You know, Lacan reminds us that God said to Moses, he didn't say, I am the only God. He said, I'm the best God. And we've kind of changed that a little. And he's kind of doing a sales pitch almost to Moses. I am the best God among all the gods. That's the foundation of monotheism. But for God to be God, it can't split off, though Christianity does a great thing of figuring that out, how to split it off to the Holy Ghost and so on. So you should know also in the Bible, God calls Abraham and he says, Abraham, Abraham. Why the double? Did Abraham not hear the first call? Did God stutter? Are there two Abrahams? Does the second Abraham cancel the first? How do you read the stutter, which is so rich and also self-subverting? Abraham, Abraham. Or Abraham, Abraham. You double the name, which should be singular and enunciated once in its unicity, in its uniqueness, and something that can't be parceled off or partitioned. Abraham, Abraham. Then in the end, she'll say, merci. Daddy, Daddy. So what does it mean to have to say it twice already? If for daddy to be daddy, the signifier should not be susceptible to division. Or maybe there are at least two daddies that we, as we've said for psychoanalysis, that we've incorporated or introjected. Daddy, Daddy, you bastard, I'm through. So this is almost trying to hang up on the paternal, trying to say, we're done. And a lot of poetry tries to say we're done, as we discussed in one of the seminars here. John Donne kept on saying, I'm done. So I'm done with this. I'm over it. And yet it keeps on repeating and can't even be named in the unicity that it might claim. Let's start from the beginning, and you can help me read, I hope, because, so first of all, it's daddy, and I already indicated, what does it mean? Could you imagine if Kafka wrote a letter to his Fati, or daddy, or papi? Or Papa. It really, of course, in English, and today a list came out saying that she's the fourth most important poet in the English, in the American canon. Daddy, is it a plea, a petition, a submission, a priori? Does it mean the poet is retrieving the infantile parts that are calling or crawling on his lap? Daddy, by Sylvia Plath. You do not do anymore. So this I could spend a week on. You do. Note, by the way, I'm rushing ahead, ach du. It's also a way that in the German tongue, you'll see that when she finally says I, it's in German, but it's again a sputter, a stutter, it's a repetition, ish. And then there's the diacritical mark, if I'm not right or wrong. You want to look, it might not be there. Where's I? Oh, here it's just, I've seen it with dashes also. And we want to be attentive. This is what Nietzsche and others have taught us, and Goethe. Read the dashes. What does that mean? Is it an abyss where language can't speak? Is it a link between two incompatible codes? Is it a stop, a silence, or is it the abundance of speech that doesn't resume in language? Read where the dashes happen in philosophy, where the commas come, or where they're obliterated in a kind of obliterature, like where are they? How does, yeah, before I had time, dash, dash, dash. So there's 3 of those. So it might be either part of a suicidal avowal, because those dashes could be daggers also, or stab marks, or wound marks. Read the unreadability of what is a diacritical mark, meaning a mark which is part of a poem or a philosophy. Nietzsche's dashes completely, it's like body art. He tattoos his corpus in a way that you want to be attentive to. So you do not do anymore. Anymore is the temporality. You no longer. If we listen to it also in French, mort is death, or the dead. But what it addresses the father the way Kafka does, you, do. And this, I would want to connect it to all sorts of possible signifying vibrations, including you do not do your due, D-U-E, the debt, what is due. And we were talking about the debt that you inherit very briefly in Faust. The due, the dad, the dud, the dead. There's a lot going on with that daddy. So you do not do is something about possibly the performativity of poetry. It would take me a long time to do that and demonstrate it. What kind of a poetic defeat or defiance or challenge is she saying? It starts with this negativity. Again, if we had months to read this, you would want to go through Hegel and negation. You do not. Again, in English, not is also a K, N-O-T. You knotted me up in the shoe. You do not do, you do not do. You can't do it. You don't do it. You undo me anymore. Or you have no performative force to do what poetry demands, or history has been as transmitted and carried by the father. This is a sidebar that I shouldn't just slide into, but what can we do? She'll say that through her father, she feels like a Jew. And I would have to take a lot of time in terms of the rhetorical moment there to scan that scandal, because it may be a problem that she's saying like a Jew. What does it mean that you are like a Jew? There's a lot of things that we would bring into a seminar on what it means to be like something. Baudelaire and others hinged their thought and poeticity on the come. What is it to be like something? It's also an allegorical stretch away. It means you're not it. You're like something, which means you're not something. There's a disjunctive insistence there. I hope I do come with footnotes, and I do want to be intelligible sometimes. So if it's too frustrating, let me know, because I'm running a lot by you. I'm inspired by you and being here. And I wanted to point out how rich a problematic it is to say it's like something. Poetry can't tolerate that. Philosophy is allergic. Like nothing is like anything. And yet we're dependent on the come, the like, the similes, building up on it. Okay, daddy, black shoe in which I have lived like a foot for 30 years, poor and white, barely daring to breathe, or achoo. So that's a strange, childish disruption. I haven't been able to achoo. Okay, so maybe it rhymes with you, but it also is a regressive, non-signifying, yet sneezy moment. Not easy, but sneezy. Now, the sneeze is something I would love to have time to unfold with you and open a dossier on. In Zachamasach, Wanda, the dominatrix, her telling motif is to sneeze. So she is educated by the great masochist to make him suffer, and her language starts, its motor starts with sneezing. Sneezing in different kinds of literatures, it's not yet language, it's not non-language, it's crude, it's not pretty, but what is it? What kind of? And when people say, bless you, for example, it means that sneezing is also diabolical and demonically inhabited. The sneeze is not something to sneeze at or to discard as easy. But I can barely dare to breathe or achoo. Daddy, I have had to kill you. So this is it could be the paradigm of parasital necessity. I've had to kill you. You died before I had time. That we could spend a lot of time on. What does that mean? Before I had time. She doesn't say to do it. She said, before I had time. So maybe the essence of paternity, of who's your daddy, is to have died before I had time. That we would have to do a lot of forays into Sein und Zeit, phenomenology, so on, if you wanted to go crazy with me, you know. What does it mean to say, I have had to kill you? So it doesn't say I had to desist or I had to renounce killing you or I couldn't kill you because you were already dead. I had to do it, whether or not you're dead or alive. That is part of the path, the trajectory, the parasital urgency of a relation to the paternal. The paternal metaphor, like the maternal phallus, doesn't have to be attached to your bio father, by the way. There are substitutions that we could consider. So, marble heavy. So here you see the monumental fixity of the paternal. It's a monument. It's marble heavy, a bag full of God. So this is God the Father also, a bag full of God, ghastly statue with one big gray toe. Don't get me started with bataille and toes and all that. And the fetish of sucking toes, excuse me. It's very relevant to a bunch of stuff here. Now, because of consideration of having you sit so kindly and silently and docilely, I'm going to scroll down. There's the German tongue in the Polish town, scraped flat by the roller of wars, wars, wars. So here's a repetition as well. Why does war keep on coming back? My Polack friend says there are a dozen or two. So I never could tell where you put your foot, your root. I could never talk to you. This is how Kafka starts, by the way, the letter to the father. He couldn't talk to his father. He had to stutter, or he stuttered because he was so terrified of the father. So he had to write the letter. I could hardly speak. I thought every German was you. I thought every German was you. So please note, that's already a world historical dissemination of the paternal. Every German was you. So this is how the father, or the terrifying father, got, in fairly recent history, we have more coming down the pike. And that's what's very important, all these vicious patriarchal figures who are ruining and ruling the world right now is what possessed me in conversation with Robin to think about the obscenity of the father, or those who presume to be the father. So I thought every German was you, and the language obscene. Okay, I'm going to, an engine, shoving me off like a Jew. Here's the like starting, a Jew to Dachau, Auschwitz, Belsen. I began to talk like a Jew. So there's, the father pitches, whatever the father is, pitches her into something that is like the most at the time, and in some of the historical records that cannot be disputed, the most persecuted, like a Jew. And then I think I may well be a Jew. So here you have, on the one hand, almost analogously, and we'd have to proceed with utmost care, rigor, and anxiety, and our nervous little rabbit ears. That's why I wear these things. How does it slip from, well, what does it mean to talk like a Jew? These are all problematic assertions. I think I may well be a Jew. What is the ontological weight of being, having become, through a series of analogous kind of hiccups or disjunctions, through the figure of the father? Does the father turn you into a persecuted, squirmy worm, or Jew in this case? So then here we could just follow the modifications of, let me do a sidebar. In Jean-Luc Nancy's political writing, Le retrait du politique, or de la politique, du politique, that's the whole point of it. The retreat of politics, and retreat in French is a retrace. You're retracing, you're effacing and tracing. Where was I going? There was something there. It will come back. Okay, so here it mutates into, I may be a bit of a Jew. So, okay. Nancy and Lacoue-Labarthe, in the retrait of the political, ask, will we ever be able to move? And this is an interpretation, a very masterful interpretation of Freud and politics. here's the crunchy moment. Will we ever move from narcissism to identification with the other? Or will we always, as human Daseins, be stuck in narcissism? And this is Freud's concern, pessimistic anxiety, and fearfulness that you won't get people, I'm saying people, the subject, Dasein, well, no, to be untethered from their primary and other narcissisms. They're all about themselves. Do you know anyone like that? You know, you'll never, it's very difficult to get people to move from narcissism to identification with the other. And that's a political problem. Now, you know that the exacerbated example of this is Trump, who has no identification with anyone except Jesus and a few other celebrities, right? So it mutates to, I think I may, no, I'm a bit of a Jew. What did this say? I think I may well be a Jew. Okay, so you are, but it's still maybe, baby. And here, if we took a sidebar, we'd go to Derrida's reading of Nietzsche's Maybe. Nietzsche didn't need to come down on us with all of his weaponry. He just had to say maybe. And he calls it, Nietzsche calls it the gefährliche vielleicht. So the dangerous perhaps. Could you imagine, think of all your dogmatic philosophers, if they go, maybe it's the truth. Maybe fucks up the whole philosophical project. That's all Nietzsche had to call in and say, let's do a maybe here. It really destabilizes and subverts any assertion or attempt to be a truth teller if you go, blah, blah, blah. Not that philosophy only says blah, 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 but blah, 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 maybe. It is very subversive. That's all it takes to knock down the idols or the monuments. So I think I may well be a Jew, and then I may be a bit of a Jew. What's the bit? Is it part of the circumcision? Is it? We could go very far on what is that covenant? What is a bit? Is it like being a little gay? You know, I may be a bit of this. I'm a bit of an anarchist, but usually I'm bougie in my restaurant choices. You know. So what is a bit, and does it have to do with a bite? Or is it something carved out? Or does it spread? Does it contaminate? You're a bit of a Jew, but that's a virus. So if I were you, I'd have a look at that. But I may be. So there's so much anxiety and ambivalence, possibly, or even desire to be a bit of that. This is something that we would, did you want to say something?
Oh, and also define purity just before, or truth as something.
That's correct. The snows of Tyrol and the clear beer of Vienna, she should have said Prague, are not very pure or true. We would unpack this. You're absolutely, it's where truth and purity come in, that she's a little bit, now that is subversive, because what is it to be a little bit of something? What if you said, I'm a little bit African? It also messes up a whole lot of racist phantasms. The perhaps, I'm a bit of this. So these little, let's say, instigators are very important in the way we think about demoralizing, the brutalizing other. You know, you don't have to, though it'd be nice if you could, come up with the artillery to really knock them out of the ring, but find the kind of micro vulnerabilities of alterity that you can eventually bring a lot to displace into another place. But this I'm saying with stutter and anxiety, and please open a credit account for me, that I would have wanted to say more. And then I don't want to overstep. I just want you to consider how the Nazification of the paternal gets intensified, okay? The boot in the face, the brute heart of a brute like you. So the brute is something you want to consider, because this gets repeated. Does it go to brute, brother? The brute of you, of a brute. Again, we've been sensitized to like. So like you, she's not saying, though it comes close to it, but how does the like read or unread that accusation? A brute like you. She's not saying you're a brute, but brute, almost stuttering toward brother and fraternity that we need to think about, but a brute heart of a brute like you. Let's just move. I just want to, if I've killed one man, I've killed two. So that would be also her husband, the vampire, the great poet Ted Hughes. Her husband who repeated the father, so this is something to be concerned with. The vampire who said he was you, so he may have said, I'm your daddy, and drank my blood for a year, 7 years if you want to know. Daddy, you can lie back now. So just look at how it ends, which is daddy, daddy, as we started, you bastard. I'm through. So this would be the fantasy, maybe, of cutting and breaking away from the paternal, which is a tragic, beautiful, impossible ending, because you know that she took her life shortly thereafter. So it leaves us whether or not you have the biographical insert, which is not only an insert, but something that we would have to consider in terms of work and life. What is the relation of the work to one's life or end of life and destructive grammars of being? So that's how she finishes. I'm through. Since there's a telephone in there, you could a little push this and say, I've gotten through, which means you have the connection now. So there's a tiny bit of, I would have to work very hard at Sisyphusian uphill efforts to make that stick, but nonetheless, I'm through. What is through? It sounds like I'm done, I'm finished, I'm over you, or this is a breakup. But can that happen, even given everything that she's built up in this poem? So I feel like I have a lot more to say, and I would rather have you participate and thank me for this joyous poem and these the dance of the paternal that you must have enjoyed having with me. These are This came to mind as an urgent motif and theme because, as I said, politics is more and more regressing to paternal or patriarchal privilege. So I wanted to suggest ways of approaching the impossibility and the fiction of the paternal that gets manipulated and politically part of a death drive that would require more and more considerations. So thank you, I guess. Thank you. It's exactly 7:30.
But we still do have time for questions. So.
You don't have to do undeconstructed questions, but you can dance, you can sing to me, you can do what you need to do, you can just do a primal scream. Yes, we're lucky. Lewis is here.
Is this actually my
microphone? It's for the recording.
It's for the recording. So I'll speak up. Avital, you spoke about sacrifice, and you spoke about, directly or by implication, the overcoming of the father, and so on and so forth. But I'm wondering about the incest motif, which is all the way through this poem, and perhaps other, infamous daddy figures like Anne Eastnin and so on. How does this tie in with the who's your daddy trajectory?
Absolutely. No, I did try to suggest it way too quickly. I think you're right. As part of the molesting father, the malicious, malignant, paternal, but in terms of desire and incestuous approach, I was concerned that that my little rabbit poses would take us down a rabbit hole, and seem to discredit the, which is wrong. I had to make a choice on the fast track, not to include the more, in my view, Freudian truths about desire and incest, and that would be a different kind of, I think, what philosophers call Einstellung or attitude. But if you want to say stuff, I would be delighted if you want to open that dossier.
Well, one thing that really struck me when you talked about Abraham and so on is a connection with this poem, because when you say the trauma by not sacrificing the son, in a sense that the sacrifice, the symbolic sacrifice, is going to then be repeated as nauseam forever, ad nauseum forever, because it's not terminated in an actual consummation. And it's like this repetition, compulsion of the trauma that comes through the poem. So this is...
That I do need to think about it. And also, don't forget that sacrifice is a metaphysical, transcendental kind of, it has something about it that is not mere killing or brutishness. So, but what are those limits, and do we trust them? And you're right to point out the traumatic, let's say, rhythms and pulses of the poem in relation to Abraham. Thank you. I need to think about that.
So there is a political conservatism of Freud, but I was thinking also about, Lacan's response to the students in Vincennes when he says, vous cherchez un nouveau maître, vous l'aurez. And obviously, Lacan is an analyst, he's no philosopher. For him, philosophy is what, as he would say, soupir Alain. It's always linked to this sort of a unicity or university in a way. But I was wondering to what extent is actually the figure of the philosopher and the figure of le maître, la maîtrise in philosophy linked to this paternal figure. Like, what's the difference between, on the one side, this kind of a toxic projection to the fascist father in this kind of a desire for fascism, the desire for the father being projected like on the social level, as you mentioned with Trump, on the one side, but on the other side, the role of the maîtrise and transference in philosophy. And what's the difference between the master, and the father, in fact? Because in Lacan, it's kind of mixed, like you have the nom du père, you have the symbolic order, but what about philosophy? Like, aren't there some differences to be made?
Oh, for sure, yeah. It also depends how you practice philosophy, and philosophers notoriously, or necessarily maybe, are on a patricidal path. They're slaying their predecessors. Every philosopher is, to a large degree, contracted to a transferential package deal that requires a knocking out of the predecessor to a certain degree. It's very complicated, and I've devoted a lot of time to this, including something that I've called Oedipedagogy. So the Oedipal relation to the mentor, the mistress, that's why I also sneak in all my friends, the dominatrixes and so on, inevitably. And certain origins of the seminar, or to wonder which orifice does knowledge go through. What kind of submissions are implied or required? What are the prerequisites? You can no longer say, you never could, prerequisites to take my course, bend over. You can't say that, I don't think. And I didn't say it. I'm quoting someone. So there is the dissemination of seeds of knowledge and the contract you sign on to, whether it's with Mephistopheles, the devil, or the teacher, who, according to Socratic, you know what Socratiser means in French? To Socratize. You know how you always see Socrates like this, but Socratiser means an anal twirling finger. So what orifice does knowledge travel through, according to the ancients, according to Socrates, who was always Socratising everyone? Not the ladies. Nietzsche was the first to open his classroom to women, by the way. He's my girl. And that shifted the scene tremendously of pedagogy, of transferential fine print, what kind of contracts are passed, what kind of transference premium do you want to attach to if you really want to learn stuff, I'm saying this in baby talk, but I, as a disciple, not only of Derrida, but I'm Derrida in his shadow all the way. I shadowed him and so on. What kind of suffering are you signing on to if you want to really learn your stuff? I remember I once took a walk with Gadamer, who was a student, well, Mr. Hermeneutics, Mr. what else is he? Yeah. In Wahrheit und Methode, so truth and method, and a Heidegger disciple. And this sounds fascistic, and that's why we may have to force ourselves, since there's a comeback, in case you didn't know, of outrageous, fascistic, unacknowledged behaviors and desires. Lyotard, the great French philosopher, said, you know, we never really came to terms with Nazism. That's not exactly the same as fascism, but they're kind of related. We let it down like a rabid dog, but we never took a courageous, like, what are people into? What are they getting off on? What is this sadistic upgrade of cruelty that we've seen in many different arenas from day one? But right now there's an upsurge in inventive cruelty. Now, who's getting off on this? Now, you may think I'm now on another track, but we would need to be careful, courageous, and unflinching enough to ask about our fascistic parts. Doesn't mean you have to act on it, but there may be fantasies, there may be imaginaire, but that require us to submit to a teacher, to a learning, to a set of precepts and premises that hurt. Psychoanalysis asks, where does it hurt? But does transference necessarily at some point require you to take a leap into an abyss of pain that can't be treated or even fully accounted for? This, I think Jana's question is very crucial. And where are there mergers that are horrifying between, you know, has anyone besides me had maniacal fascistic professors? Am I the only one? And guess what? I loved it. I'm quoting her, every woman adores, you know. They would beat you to a pulp, okay, enough about me, but humiliation, hazing, rituals, the insistence, especially if you're tagged as a girl or something, of non-belonging, or what Celan calls unbelonging, being a misfit, a professional misfit, by the way, where you are always beckoned by the call of suicide, not just when you're in a bad mood or something, but you're always saying, I'm through. And how through are you? But you're teetering on this. So where do you think there's a drug-free zone from the fabulous highs and lows of transferential pedagogies? Who are your best teachers? Are they the biggest brutes? Or could you transfer onto someone who just whispers like Nietzsche, you know, and then opens up galaxies of pain at the same time from which he comes? These are questions that I wish we could, but we're in such a continue to pursue. We're in such an emergency mode that we can't even, except maybe in the cave here, in the, you know, in our secret closets. We can ask about how much terror, I'm quoting Rilke, is involved in opening up to something like a true teaching. Now I sound like an illuminé, maybe, a little fascist mutant, or a mutant fascist. I'm trying to take them seriously, all of them. Bataille, all of my fabulous crazies and abyss openers or grazers, you know? And so your question is very, very important. And a lot of philosophers have a slot waiting for them as a very tyrannical father, if only because they're wielding truth. Now, woman, since forever, but certainly Nietzsche, and here you can go to Derrida's Spurs or Spuren or Éperon. As I suggested with Eve, they're not impressed with truth, according to certain. So there's another, maybe, algorithm, as you said the other night, very also at one point, or you responded to, of transferential rage, delight, danger. So Heidegger said one of the most important questions that has not been treated yet is danger. How much danger can you take? How much endangerment do we subject ourselves to or want? This is already the question of beyond the pleasure principle, where you're not just content to be content, but you're going to put yourself on the line and take leaps that are mutilating, painful, brutalizing, and mistaken. You make a wrong move or a wrong turn, but how much does that get libidinized in a kind of transferential pedagogical scene, I would say? Did that confuse everyone, or do you understand that there is danger to learning? When all those idiots in America who hate the university and learning, and they think it's dangerous, yeah. I wish we were at a point where you would say, yeah, very dangerous, watch out, and move out of the way if you can't handle it. You know, there is, that phantasm can't just be dismissed, though, pragmatically and strategically, tactically, it has to be dismissed. Nonetheless, yeah, they have something going on there. Learning since Eve is very endangering and marks your finitude. You're a dead man walking, you know, if you start the transferential machine and you get in it, and one wants to say, bring it. Bring it. Go ahead. Yeah, be afraid of learning. Because there are abysses. I wouldn't make it have a nice text, you know. So these troubling questions get you in trouble, but I think one would have to also agonize over what she means when she says every woman adores a fascist. Now, adore is different than love or transference. I don't know what it is. It could be ironic, though she doesn't seem very ironic, right? Do you have a reading of every woman adores a fascist?
But it's like last psychology of fascism, this kind of a why do we desire fascism, question. Yeah. And the same thing, like it makes me think, so for instance, if you think of like the kind of neurotic identification with the Führer, it's a kind of a neurotic identification with the father. I mean, again, I'm just like improvising, this is not a strict theory, but just wondering if, for instance, the identification with the Führer, there would be no transference per se. Whereas like in teaching, what's the, you know, the transference might be operating, and with it, like, you know, the love, the role of love of the transference in psychoanalysis, which might not be actually in this kind of a, let's say, sadistic or neurotic identification like with Hitler, you know, in Nazism, I don't know. Just like maybe there's a structurally different role of transference in those two, the absence of transference in one case.
Hitler really didn't want to be, and wasn't for the most part considered a father. He was not the father of a nation. So that would be something that Lacan also tries to, or does address. We'd want to see who gets to join that rank. Thank you. Those are things to think about.
Only very briefly, I mean, also famously, at the end, well, one could ask what kind of gesture that was. Hitler said that this nation was not up to the mission he had for it, so it's their fault and they maybe deserve the catastrophe that he brought upon Germany. But moving from adoring through the like to like as a verb, in the end, it's the villagers who never liked you. I was wondering about that one as well. Who are the villagers? I mean, we hear of Polish villages before, which are unidentifiable. They're unidentifiable too. It's also certainly not the citizens or the cosmopolitans, those from the city. So they are dancing and stamping on you, on your grave. That's unidentifiable like all these other graves. So what are they doing here, and what kind of substitution is happening here that enables her to say, I'm through, right after?
That's great. She says it twice, actually.
Yeah.
So, I'm through. If you want to say more, please do, but
I think that the doubles good as like a concluding remark. If we may, in that case, close the evening. If that is.
I want to thank you for your introduction. It was grandiose. It was great.
Well, we would most of all like to thank you for your intervention, for your descent into hell, for your semination, as you said. We would like to thank all of you for joining into this discussion, and if not, then just listening. We would like to thank ourselves for doing this thing.
Brave.